1886, the dying days of the Old West. Two Native American men by the name of Marcel and Grey Lizard have been recruited by Geronimo into his campaign to free his people from the reservations. Unfortunately, before they can rendezvous with the legendary Medicine Man and his warband, they are captured and detained by US forces. This sets in motion a chain of events that in 2014 will lead to Alfonso Ribeiro doing this on Dancing with the Stars. I'm Eddie Edwards, this is Track Down, and this is the truly insane story of the Incredible Bongo Band. Chapter 1, Marcel, 1886. We're in the birthplace of 7-Up, Missouri, the Show Me State. Marcel and Grey Lizard escape from their prison train somewhere outside of St. Louis. This begins a trek of over 1,200 miles across some of the Old West's most punishing and awe-inspiring terrain. Eventually, the two of them manage to return to their homelands in Arizona. Marcel would sadly never be reunited with his family, who had probably been caught up in the same forced relocations that Geronimo was fighting against. Marcel balked at the idea of abandoning his tribe's traditional lands to live in one place for the rest of his days. You could say he had his reservations about it. Sorry, that's deeply inappropriate. Marcel took a wife and lived out his days in the wilds of Arizona. During this period, his legend grew, with him being credited or blamed for seemingly every raid, crime or misfortune for hundreds of miles. I know, white people blaming someone who isn't white for something without proof seems unbelievable today, but it was a different time. This all earned him the nickname, the Last Apache Warrior, which is undeniably badass. He was eventually gunned down sometime between 1906 and 1907. He is also the first person on this show to have a geographical feature named after him. Marceao Point is a scenic overlook located in Chiricahua National Park. It's very possible that the news coverage of his eventual death might be where the writer Paul I. Wellman, who would have been about 11 or 12 at the time, first encountered his story. That's speculation on my part, but I do know that Wellman's third novel in 1936, entitled Bronco Apache, was a novelisation of Marceau's life story. Now I know what you're thinking. This story sounds pretty interesting, but it's 2026. I'm not going to read a book. I wish there was maybe a movie about it. There is a movie from 1954. I'm going to show a clip, but before I do, my legal team have insisted that I read the following statement. The purpose of this channel is to entertain and educate. Due to the historical nature of the subject matter often discussed, sometimes clips from different time periods with different social norms may be used. With that said, both the Trackdown brand and Eddie Edwards individually would like to make it clear that while some aspects of older media have not aged well, they are shown on the channel purely in the interests of historical honesty, and in no way constitute either an endorsement or acceptance. Furthermore, any jokes, japes or quips are engaged in entirely at the expense of the idiots who engaged in these practices. That should cover it. Anyway, roll the clip.
You saw the peace pipe in Geronimo's hands.
Geronimo does not speak for me. I remember what happened to others who surrendered. Shipped off like cattle to a faraway place called Florida, never to return.
But at least you would be alive, Marcel.
You call that life? If an Apache cannot live in his home mountains like his fathers before him, he is already dead. Now get back where you belong.
Yeah, you stick it to the white man, Burt Lancaster. The movie was made in 1954 and starred Burt Lancaster in brownface as Marceau. I was completely unaware of this movie's existence, but it is now firmly in my top 5 most egregious cases of actors playing races they really fucking shouldn't. In at number 5, it's Fisher Stevens in Short Circuit. Should have known better by 1986, dude. At number 4, we have new entrant Burt Lancaster charting high with Marceau and Apache. At number 3, it's Fisher Stevens again with Short Circuit 2. If it was bad in 1986, it was worse in 1988. Coming in strong at number 2, it's Al Jolson in The Jazz Singer. And at number 1, just everyone in Birth of a Nation. Now, in fairness to Lancaster and everyone else involved, Marceau is unequivocally the hero of the movie. Also, in fairness, the white people don't come off too bad, and they fucking should. Anyway, British songwriter Jerry Lorden saw the movie and was inspired by it to write an instrumental composition that he gave the same name as the film. Chapter 2, Apache.
I wanted something noble and dramatic, reflecting the courage and savagery of the Indian.
Look, it's from the 50s and it's a white Englishman talking about a Native American played by an American in brownface. Of course, it's an offensive quote. Anyway, he started working on the tune in the late 1950s, which he then handed off to the legendary Burt Weedon. No, hold on a minute, that's not right. Burt Weedon was born in East Ham in 1920, but his guitar skills would take him far. Well, his Wikipedia page says he died in Beaconsfield, so about 30 miles. He was moderately influential on younger musicians of the time, but he is more or less exactly what you'd expect from a 1950s guitarist. However, he does have the distinction of being the first person to record Apache. However, Lorden wasn't a fan of his performance, and I've got to say, I've listened to a lot of versions of this song for this video. It's probably the weakest I've heard. Although it opens with what I think is a tom-tom being used to emulate Native American style tribal drumming, which is interesting given what would follow. Due to promotional issues, Whedon didn't get his version released until early August of 1960, and by then it was too late. Chapter 3, The Shadows. Part of the UK skiffle boom, the Shadows were pioneers of the now ubiquitous British four-piece. 3 guitarists, lead, rhythm and bass, and a drummer. It's hard to understate how influential the Shadows were on the burgeoning UK music scene, no less than John Lennon once stated.
Before them, there was nothing worth listening to in England.
Whilst George Harrison put it even more bluntly.
No Shadows, no Beatles.
More importantly, lead guitarist Hank Marvin would become Cockney rhyming slang, a feat that would go unmatched by any other British musician until James Blunt, which is Cockney rhyming slang for Ed Sheeran. Hank Marvin met fellow bandmate Bruce Welsh at school in Newcastle upon Tyne, and like all talented people from the area, they quickly left. Moving to London when they were only 16, after working as session musicians for a while, including a stint with Benny Hill, yes, that Benny Hill, the duo's big break came one day whilst Hank was hanging out at the legendary Two Eyes Coffee House on Old Compton Street. A man came in looking for a guitarist and needed him to be able to start tomorrow. Marvin quickly proved he could play and was hired, and he asked if his friend could come along. The next day, he and Welsh were the backing band for Cliff Richard. If you're not from the UK, Cliff Richard might be a bit difficult to describe as a cultural phenomenon, but suffice to say, in the late 1950s, he was very much seen as the UK's version of Elvis, right down to the underwhelming movie career.
In the driver's seat is Cliff Richard. On the upper deck, stowaway Laurie Peters. And he's a girl.
I'm Zero.
Just for the record, I've loved you ever since I was a little boy.
Summer Holiday, the song-studded spectacular that's gloriously gay.
For legal reasons, Cliff Richard is very definitely not gay. He's a devout Christian, even going so far as to have his own live-in priest. Of course, a UK version of Elvis wouldn't have been needed if the Colonel would have let him tour internationally, so it's just one more thing to hold against the old fraud. Anyway, whatever else I'd like to say about Cliff Richard, he did have an eye for talent. And soon after Marvin and Welsh, Jet Harris joined on bass. Tony Meehan rounded out the lineup on drums. Recognising just how fucking good his backing band was, Richards pushed his label to sign them to their own deal. The band were called into the Columbia offices for a live audition, and 3 songs later they were signed. Once Richards had finished his tour, the label sent the Shadows on a quick tour of the States, and when they came back had them booked for a few UK dates. Crucially, their support act for these dates was Jerry Lorden. Not being a fan of Burt Whedon's version of Apache,
Look how they massacred my boy.
Lorden played them the song on ukulele and asked if they'd like to record it as an instrumental, at which point they basically took his arm off. Everyone in the Shadows knew they'd been handed a golden opportunity. Unfortunately, that didn't extend to producer Norrie Paramore. Paramore was fine with letting the band record Apache, but only as a B-side to his preferred first single for the band, The Quartermaster Stores, which I've listened to and is not as bad as its name might have you believe. See? Pleasant. Given the disagreement with the band, Paramore decided to take both tracks home to play for his teenage daughters and see which they preferred. The results came back a resounding success for Apache. This marks 2 points in this story where teenage girls will be weirdly important. Apache was released in July and went on to be #1 in the UK, Ireland and New Zealand, and most importantly, #2 in Belgium. Also, it achieved the feat which might be unique to the Shadows, in that the song it knocked off the top spot was Please Don't Tease by Cliff Richard and the Shadows. This is the first time, as far as I can tell, a backing band have unseated their frontman. I say first time because there are 2 more occasions where this has happened. Those were both the Shadows as well. Funnily enough, I can only find one instance of a frontman knocking his backing band off the top spot, and of course that's Cliff Richards and the Shadows unseating the Shadows. However, in one of the weirdest moves in musical history, the Shadows never released Apache in the States. That privilege would go to Danish jazz and pop guitarist Jørgen Ingman. This sort of thing always struck me as weird. I don't know if this was the same in other countries, but we had artists over here who basically made a career out of recording anything that was doing well in the US charts before a UK label could press any records. I mean, the internet might have turned out to have some considerable downsides, but at least there's not a modern day version of Cilla Black building a career off covering Taylor Swift songs in the UK before she can get the jet fueled. Anyway, Ingman reached #2 in the US Billboard 100. That takes us up to 1960. At this point in the story, things start to get odd. Chapter 4, the attempted assassination of Fidel Castro. In the late 1950s, Fidel Castro and his band of revolutionaries, including famed t-shirt Che Guevara, overthrew the US-backed dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista and promptly allied themselves with Stalin's USSR. This was unpopular with the Americans, who nevertheless realised that this whole situation could have been avoided if they'd stayed out of the politics of an independent country and decided to never again involve themselves in the internal politics of a sovereign nation state. I'm joking, of course. They decided to assassinate Castro. However, in a rare moment of self-awareness, the CIA realised that even if successful, the chances of their involvement being discovered were still very high. What they needed was a group with no ties to the US government who had a plausible motive for going after Castro, so that if their involvement was discovered, the press wouldn't look any further. Fortunately for the CIA, Castro's rebellion hadn't just upset the US's legitimate business concerns in the Caribbean. Cuba had been a prime tourist destination for Americans with a host of mafia-run casinos. The CIA approached 2 well-known mafiosos, Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli, with an offer of $150,000 to off the bearded revolutionary. Giancana and Roselli counter-offered that they would do it for free, out of patriotism. The CIA accepted, which just goes to show the importance of having access to good mafia movies. Never end up owing a favour to the mob. What followed was an incredible comedy of errors, where attempts to kill Castro were so varied as to include poison pills, an exploding conch shell and the Bay of Pigs. It was so successful that Castro eventually died of old age in 2016. All of which is to say that the Kennedy administration, and by extension the Kennedy family, ended up owing Roselli a few favours. I mention all that because it's really the only way I can see that Michael Vina, who knew Roselli as Uncle Johnny, would wind up as an aide on Bobby Kennedy's ill-fated presidential campaign. Chapter 5, the successful assassination of Robert Kennedy. Before having his good name ruined by his really fucking weird son, RFK was mostly known for being JFK's brother, who was appointed as Attorney General at the age of 35, saw his brother get assassinated, ran for president, and then had his own run ended terminally by Sirhan at the Ambassador Hotel in 1968. A terrible tragedy that would unfortunately unleash Richard Nixon on an unsuspecting world.
And furthermore, by golly, I promise to cut taxes for the rich and use the poor as a cheap source of teeth for aquarium gravel.
It also had the very odd side effect of leaving a young, idealistic Michael Vina disillusioned and at a loose end. He did what most of us would do in these circumstances and produced a novelty comedy album. Notably, he did it for a mere $50 and would go on to sell 40,000 copies. That album was the best of Marceao, as in the famous mime artist Marcel, although the name was spelt differently, probably to avoid legal action. Each side of the album had 19 minutes of silence, followed by a 1-minute round of applause. That is an objectively brilliant joke. I like you, Michael. This was the one and only album released on Vina's label Gone If Records, but not due to lack of success. Given sales against outlay, this album had an incredible return on investment and caught the eye of MGM Records, who bought the label and hired Vina as a producer. MGM re-released the album, which again is mostly silence with 2 minutes of applause later that year. Before we talk about what he did whilst at MGM, I just want to mention that in later life he went on to found a books on tape company. I bring that up for 2 reasons. One, he founded the company after winning an $8,000 backgammon bet with author Sidney Sheldon, who, because nothing about this story is normal, was also the creator of I Dream of Jeannie. Instead of taking the money, he asked for the rights to produce 2 of Sidney's books as books on tape, which is a factoid that raises so many questions, mainly ones about the world of high-stakes backgammon betting that I had no idea even existed. 2, he was responsible for the audiobook of Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, which is probably the only time a theoretical physicist is going to get mentioned on this show, but given that we talk about the music industry, definitely not the only time someone in the Epstein Files will be. Also, that audiobook is credited as being read by Michael Jackson, and whilst I don't think it is that one, I'm going to pretend to believe it is for comedic effect, Shimon, Ehe, etc. So, whilst at MGM, Vina found himself working as the music coordinator on a few movie projects, including one where he struck up a friendship with ex-NFL star and fellow former RFK aide Rosie Greer. Greer had been much closer with RFK, as in disarmed and restrained his murderer close. However, this relationship led to Vina being the music supervisor on another of Greer's projects. That project was The Thing with Two Heads, which is a movie about a thing, not a thing. It's now, you might think with a title like that, it sounds like a really poorly conceived sequel to The Thing, but no, it's Well, look, fortunately for us, the poster of the movie includes a nice little synopsis, so I'm just going to read that verbatim. They transplanted a white bigot's head onto a soul brother's body. The doctor blew it. The most fantastic medical experiment of the age. And now with the fights, the fuzz, the chicks, and the choppers, man, they're really in deep trouble.
Then you're going to help me?
Yes. I think I will.
Williams,
If you cut off my head, that'll be murder.
But it's okay for you to cut off my head, is that right?
Is this worse than Burt Lancaster in Brownface? I don't know. Is it a better movie? I'm the wrong person to ask. I've got a copy of the script of The Room, signed by Tommy Wiseau. I thought it was fantastic, especially the part with the two-headed gorilla. Oh, by the way, if any of this does sound strangely familiar, yes, it is the inspiration for a Treehouse of Horror episode.
Perhaps you're wondering why you have two heads.
So you've got your movie about a soul brother with a biggot's head attached to him. Of course, you're gonna need a soundtrack, and for that, you need a composer. So, do you want someone classy, like an Oscar nominee? Or do you want somebody lowbrow, like a guy who does theme music for soap operas? Why not both? Perry Botkin Jr. was nominated at the 1971 Academy Awards for Best Original Song for Bless the Beasts and Children from the movie of the same name, and his track Nadia's Theme would go on to be used as the opening music for The Young and the Restless. So, Perry Botkin put together the soundtrack, and the studio wanted to release it on vinyl, as was the style at the time. There was just one issue. They were a little short on music. To bring it up to the right length for a full album, they needed 2 more tracks. Botkin had previously used the idea of a track that was almost entirely percussion on the 1971 movie RPM. I hope you appreciate how difficult it was to find some of these movies, even as, let's say, an experienced traveller of the high seas. Botkin thought that the percussion would be a good sound for the thing with 2 heads, and so the idea of the Incredible Bongo Band was born. Chapter 6, Lineups. The Incredible Bongo Band had 2 key lineups made up of some of the best session musicians of the era.
We're the people you always heard, but you never heard of.
Initially, to record the 2 additional tracks, a group was put together consisting of Ed Green on drums, who was coming off working with Barry White and would go on to work with Sparks, Diana Ross and Marvin Gaye, to name only a tiny piece of his discography. Legendary saxophonist Wilton Felder, Joe Sample on keyboards, jazz guitarist Dave T. Walker and least experienced member Dean Parks. Now, you've definitely heard all of these guys play before, as they all reunited in 1973 to work on Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On. Also, Dean Parks played guitar on the soundtrack to Care Bears 2, The New Generation. Putting the bongos in the Incredible Bongo Band was percussionist Bobby Hall. How good a percussionist was Bobby Hall? Well, in 1978, Bob Dylan paid her $10,000 a month to join him on tour. Adjusted for inflation, that'd be just over $50,000 a month today. In the same year as working on the Incredible Bongo Band, she worked with Carole King, Bill Withers and Joni Mitchell. So yeah, pretty decent. They were tasked with recording 2 tracks. One, a cover of the 1959 Preston Epps track Bongo Rock, and no, we're not covering Preston Epps. I'm already too deep in on this one. I thought it would be a quicker video than the last one, and it's already spiraled so much. And you won't believe me when I say we haven't even gotten to the really weird bits yet, but we haven't, trust me. So suffice to say, he was a bongo player from the 50s. We don't need to do a deep dive on Preston Epps. He was in the movie Girl in Gold Boots, which means he has turned up in an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Man, if it gets any wilder here, a bridge game is going to break out.
Anyway, they recorded that and a second track written by Botkin called Bongolia. I said Bongolia.
I'm sorry.
For reasons that were only ever known to Vina, the decision was taken that they should release Bongo Rock as a single, with Bongolia as a B-side. Bongo Rock didn't do too well in the US, barely cracking the top 50, but it did reach number 20 in Canada. It wasn't released in Belgium. That's a bit odd. You're probably wondering what makes the Great White North so susceptible to the sweet, sweet sound of bongos, and the answer to that, my friend, is legislation. No, really. If you're not Canadian, you're probably not aware of the fact that by law, 50% of all music played on Canadian radio must be Canadian in origin. That's either the music, the artist, the performance, or the lyrics must be Canadian, which sort of spells Maypole. This is why no one takes you seriously, Canada. So who was it that in that original lineup of the incredible bongo band that got that for them? Well, the answer might surprise you. It was none of them. Vina just lied and said they were Canadian, and the Canadians were just like, oh yeah, sounds good, eh? So with all of this, Vina saw an opportunity and decided to record a full album with a new lineup, and this time they'd actually record in Vancouver so they could actually be counted as a Canadian production. The new lineup, which I'm going to call the Insane Lineup, I'm going to introduce now in order of insanity. We'll start with Steve Douglas on saxophone. This guy was a legend. He worked with Dylan, the Ramones, and Leonard Cohen. A nice, normal music man. Mike Melvoin was on piano. His life is a little more insane just by virtue of working on more iconic projects. For example, he was the organ player on the entirety of Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. Oh, and he played the organ on this little ditty.
That's life.
That's life.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. Now there's a bit of confusion about this. Mike Melvoin was definitely involved in the recording, and everything I can find says he was on pianos, but all of the organ playing seems to be credited to Robbie King. He's in the British Columbia Music Hall of Fame and is at least partially responsible for Bryan Adams. On bass was Jerry Sheff. I don't have words for this one, so I'll just show a clip.
On the Fender bass, Jerry Sheff.
Remember, I'm doing these in order of insanity, and I've got 3 left. On bongos, King Erison. He first came to global attention when he was playing music in a bar in Nassau and was discovered by Sean Connery, who put him in Thunderball.
Why don't you come with us quietly?
Mike Deasy joined on guitar. He'd been a fairly big name for a few years, including a period where he dressed up as a monk, called himself Friar Tuck, and played psychedelic guitar. I don't even know how to start this story. So Deasy lived in LA in the 60s, and given his predilection to psychedelics, he was doing some pretty interesting stuff. He'd become fascinated with the Hopi tribe of Native Americans and their particular traditions of recording their history and lore in song that were handed down orally from generation to generation. He was planning on heading to Arizona and working with them to record some songs. A friend of his, a record producer called Terry Melcher, who happened to be Doris Day's son, because why should anything ever be normal in this story, heard about his plan and told him if he wanted to do a dry run of this to test how the recording would work, he knew some people who were currently living like Native Americans at a compound in the hills outside LA. I'm just going to make sure I'm clear on that point. He went to a compound in the hills outside LA in 1969. Anyway, long story short, things took a bad turn, and Mike Deasy had probably what was the scariest experience available to a human being in 1969, when he ended up being chased through the wilderness by an axe-wielding Charles Manson whilst tripping balls on LSD. He apparently hid in the hills for 3 days. A few months later, following the Tate LaBianca murders, the police requested his recordings. After that, Mike Deasy decided God had been protecting him that night, which, you know what, fucking fair enough. So he moved out of LA, became a born-again Christian, all of which meant he was living in the Pacific Northwest at the time, so they got him to play guitar. And the number one craziest story about a member of the incredible bongo band goes to the drummer, Jim Gordon. Because he's got the same name as Commissioner Gordon. Off of the Batman. No, it's because he killed his mum. In 1983, due to a combination of undiagnosed schizophrenia and heavy drug use, he took a hammer and butcher knife to his 71-year-old mother, claiming voices told him to do it. He remained incarcerated at the California Medical Facility until his death in 2023. It's kind of hard to transition out of that, so let's just move on. Chapter 7, The Last Songs. With the album more or less finished, there were only 2 tracks left to be recorded. Only one problem: both the drummer and the bongo player had other commitments, which is a bit of a problem for a percussion-led album. Now, I don't know the names of both of these tracks, only one, which was going to be a version of the much-covered instrumental track known as Apache. Yeah, that's right, the first recording of Apache didn't have any fucking bongos on it, which is weirdly more insane than all of the murder stuff. So, that song was recorded with Cat Hendrickson filling in on drums for Jim Gordon, with the intention that Gordon and Erison would record their sessions in LA later. There is apparently a bit of dispute as to whether the drums you hear on Apache are Hendrickson or Gordon. For his part, Hendrickson claims that he can definitely hear some of his signature moves, but Gordon was a genius, so he might have heard what Hendrickson was doing and decided to incorporate that into his playing. For obvious reasons, we've never gotten Gordon on the record about this. It's also entirely possible that whoever put the mix together incorporated elements of both. Chapter 8, The Merry-Go-Round. Usually, at this point in proceedings, I'll sit here and have to work out what series of events transpired to get from a forgotten bongo album to insanely influential track, but we don't really need to do that here. It was DJ Kool Herc. So, if you don't know the story, Clive Campbell was born in Kingston, Jamaica in 1955. But at the age of 13, his family immigrated to the Bronx, where his height and athleticism on the basketball courts got him the nickname Hercules. Now, at the time, a lot of Bronx culture was tied up in the block parties, where DJs would play various tunes, usually looking for songs with the best breaks. The story goes that Herc stumbled across the incredible bongo band while searching through local record shops for new tracks.
In the beginning, when the art of crate digging, a lot of those records were discovered strictly on instinct and how the album cover looked.
Upon listening to the record, he knew he had found something special, to the point where he scratched the label off so other DJs wouldn't know what album it was and steal what was about to become his signature break. Now, usually, it can be very difficult to pin down the exact moment a musical genre starts, unless it's like black metal, which started in November 1982 when Venom released the album Black Metal. However, with hip-hop, we do know exactly when and where it began. The place? The Rec Room of 1520 Sedgwick Avenue. The date? August the 11th, 1973. The event? A party where Kool Herc was charging 25 cents entry to raise money for his sister Cindy's back-to-school supplies. This is the second time in our story teenage girls have been weirdly important. That night, Kool Herc announced to the audience that he was going to try something new called the merry-go-round.
They're waiting for this particular break, and I have a couple more records that's got the same breakup in it. I wonder how would it be if I put them all together. And I told them, I said, I'm going to try something new tonight. I'm going to call it the merry-go-round.
You see, Herc had noticed that people really went crazy for those drum breaks in songs. So he thought that if he could cut out the fat and just have the drum breaks, he'd be onto a winner. So by using 2 turntables, jumping back and forth whilst dropping the disc back, he could create a mix of just the breaks. The first time he did this for an audience, the 2 songs he used were James Brown's Give It Up or Turn It Loose and Apache by the incredible bongo band. Literally, the first time hip-hop happened, Apache was there. This innovation of Herc's was too good not to be copied like crazy, and it didn't take long for someone to uncover his bongo-based secret. Once the word was out, everybody started using it. Now, prior to the creation of the merry-go-round, DJs would usually have a microphone hooked up to help them work the crowd. Now though, with all of the beat matching and the swapping of records, DJs were too busy to do that. So now they needed somebody else to talk to the crowd, so MCs were brought in. And there you have it, hip-hop was born. But it wasn't just at hip-hop's birth. In 1977, Grand Wizard Theodore, real name Theodore Livingston, says that it was an accident whilst recording a sample from Apache that led him to invent scratching. See, back then when you needed to record a mixtape, which many DJs were selling at the block parties to supplement their income, you had to actually perform a DJ set and have a tape recorder with a microphone hooked up. Well, just putting one such mixtape together in his bedroom, Livingston's mother came in to talk to him. This resulted in him resting his hand on the record he was playing, which happened to be Apache. Listening to the tape back, he liked what he heard and he started to incorporate scratching into his sets. In 1979, the Sugar Hill Gang dropped Rapper's Delight, which became the first commercial hip-hop hit. This would lead to a self-titled first album and the second album, Eighth Wonder, which included their track Apache, which of course sampled the incredible bongo band heavily. From there, you know the rest of the story. According to Who Sampled, Apache has been sampled on 810 tracks by people like Nas, Jay-Z, Aphex Twin, MC Hammer, Moby, The Roots, TLC. I could go on. Mick Jagger used it. Blur used it for a remix of There's No Other Way. It's sampled on the soundtrack to Sonic R. It's been called the national anthem of hip-hop, and it's hard to disagree. Chapter 9. Alfonso Ribeiro. Oh yeah, so in the 1996 episode of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Viva Lost Wages, Carlton gambles away his and Will's return plane tickets, so they have to enter a dance competition to win the money to get home. Of course, they dance to Apache. WatchMojo put it on their list of top 10 moments from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Mentally, they put it above one of the greatest moments in television history.
Jeffrey?
Break out, Lucille.
This introduced the song to white people, and by extension, weddings everywhere. So, when Alfonso Ribeiro was a contestant during Dancing with the Stars' 19th season, they had to have him do one thing.
It's not unusual to be mad with anyone.
Okay, two things. Hey you, yeah you, thanks for watching. This one ended up being bigger than I was expecting. If you like what I do here, give the channel a subscribe, ding the bell to get notified when I upload, and most importantly, please, if you enjoyed this video, give it a share so other people will see it. Thanks, bye.